Hello kids, welcome to the dream journey. Today we are going to tell a new story. Imagine a castle as tall as the clouds, with towers that shine like gold in the sun, and marble halls that echo every footstep. Inside, a young prince, no older than you, runs through a garden maze lined with roses and fountains. He's not running from anything dangerous. No, he's just chasing a butterfly that has the nerve to ignore royal commands. He laughs and leaps until he slips, tumble a bump and then stillness. When the boy blinks awake, the clouds are gone, the hedges are gone, and the castle is nowhere in sight. He's lying in the grass beneath a tree he doesn't recognize, with a strange little bird chirping angrily at him from a low branch. There's a tiny scrape on his forehead and a dazed look in his eyes. He doesn't know who he is. Not his name, not his title, not even why his boots are far too clean for a place that smells like mud and turnips. The wind smells of soil, bread, and wood smoke. A butterfly, the same one, floats past his nose. And then there are footsteps, not guards in armor, not butlers or servants. Well, just a girl. She has muddy shoes, a big grin, and wild hair that looks like it never obeys a comb. She looks at him like he's a strange vegetable growing in her patch. "Well," she says, squinting at him, "you don't look very useful, but you've got hands. Can you dig?" And the prince, who doesn't remember being royal at all, blinks and replies, "I think so." Tessa didn't wait for a proper introduction. She simply turned and waved him along, as if it were perfectly normal to find a confused boy sitting under her plum tree. Her muddy boots squished with each step as she stomped across the tilled earth. The prince, though he didn't remember being a prince, followed her, brushing soil from his sleeves. His fine white shirt was wrinkled now, and the golden stitching near the cuffs was fraying, but he didn't notice. Not when the world was so loud with buzzing bees and wind in the weeds. Tessa crouched beside a wooden crate and began tossing out turnips like they were pebbles. "We're late for planting," she said matter-of-factly. "You ever stuck your fingers in good, wet dirt before?" The boy hesitated. "I don't think so." She laughed, a bright, bubbling sound like water spilling from a jug. "Then you're about to have a very weird day." He knelt beside her. The ground was still damp from last night's rain, and it squished pleasantly between his fingers. A worm wiggled by, and he yelped. Tessa cackled. "They don't bite," she said. "Well, maybe just a little, if you insult their tunnels." He smiled without realizing it. The cottage loomed behind them, small and covered in ivy. A chicken perched suspiciously in a bucket. The world here was messy, loud, and nothing like what his bones vaguely remembered. Yet there was something comforting in the way the breeze pushed his hair and the sunlight danced through the clouds. Tessa planted another row of carrots and handed him a seedling. "Put it in," she said. "We've got work to do, strange boy with nice boots." And so, the prince who had forgotten everything began to remember what it felt like to simply be. The garden was alive with the quiet chatter of bees and the rustle of green leaves whispering secrets to the wind. Tessa moved through it like she was born from the earth itself. Barefoot now, apron flapping, twine around her wrist like a bracelet made of chores. The boy knelt beside a crooked row of tomatoes, his knees quickly smudged with dirt. He clutched a rusty trowel in one hand and a seedling in the other, looking back and forth as if waiting for instructions from an invisible tutor. Tessa leaned over and plopped another seedling in with a quick twist of her fingers. "Just like that," she said. "Dig, drop, tuck. Like putting a sleepy bug into bed." The boy tried. He dug a lopsided hole, dropped the seedling, and attempted to cover it. The soil crumbled like cake. Tessa snorted. "You dig like a royal goose." He looked up sharply. "What makes you think I'm royal?" He shrugged. "You smell like soap and roses, and your shirt has more stitches than my Sunday apron. That's not village work." He paused, staring down at his hands. clean, delicate, still unsure. "Maybe I was a goose," he said. "A very well-dressed one." That made her laugh again, so hard she nearly fell into the cabbage bed. They worked through the morning side by side. The boy's holes got straighter. His hands grew browner. The sun rose higher, painting shadows across the vegetable patch. By the time they tied up the tomato vines with bits of twine, he'd forgotten his headache. He only remembered how it felt to laugh at worms and learn something with dirt under your fingernails. "Not bad," Tessa said, handing him a crooked carrot. "You're still weird, but useful." He grinned and took a bite. Crunched like a memory waking up. By midday, the sun grew sleepy and so did the children. Tessa tugged the boy toward the cottage, where the smell of something warm and buttery drifted through the open window. Inside, the cottage felt like a hug. Uneven wooden floors, pots clinking gently, and the hum of a song someone wasn't quite singing aloud. Tessa's mother looked up from her seat by the hearth, needle in hand, a patch of bright red fabric on her lap. "Well, you've been in the garden," she said, noting the dirt smudges across the boy's cheek. "Do your hands know how to stitch too?" He blinked. "They've never been asked." "Then we'll teach them," she replied. Tessa flopped onto a stool, mouth already full of jam-covered bread. The boy was handed a square of fabric, a needle that looked far too sharp, and a long piece of thread that tangled the moment he touched it. Tessa watched, giggling behind her cup of tea, as the boy poked himself for the 5th time and scowled at the thread like it had betrayed him. Her mother, patient and smiling, guided his fingers. In, out, in, out. Breathe with it. The rhythm came slowly, like learning to walk again. His fingers fumbled, then steadied. The stitches were crooked and lumpy, but they held. The cottage was quiet now, save for the tick of a wooden clock and the soft rasp of thread through cloth. A pot boiled gently in the background, releasing the scent of herbs and potatoes. The boy glanced down at his first patch, a shaky flower in blue thread. "I made something," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Tessa peeked over and nodded. "It's wobbly, but it's real." He smiled, a quiet, glowing smile. And somewhere in his chest, something that had always been polished and distant began to feel soft. The clouds had been teasing all afternoon, gathering, stretching, whispering above the trees. And just as Tessa finished hanging laundry across the garden fence, the first raindrop fell with a soft plip on the prince's nose. Then came another, and another. Within seconds, the sky opened up, and the world turned silver. The prince darted under the porch overhang, arms over his head. "It's raining." Tessa, however, stood in the open, arms wide, face tilted to the sky. "So," she called over the steady patter. "It's just sky water." She began to dance. Awkward, stompy steps through the mud, skirts twirling, laughter echoing between the trees. Pancake the goat took shelter beneath a wheelbarrow, judging silently. The boy watched, blinking. Somewhere in the back of his mind was a voice that said, "This is not proper behavior." And yet, he stepped out. At first, he tiptoed, avoiding puddles like they were traps. But the rain didn't bite, kissed. The puddles didn't scold. They splashed. Tessa grabbed his hand and spun him. His feet slipped, and he landed bottom first in the mud. She doubled over laughing. So did he. Their clothes clung to their skin. Their hair stuck to their cheeks. Mud climbed up their legs like paintbrush strokes. And still they spun, stomped, laughed. A bolt of lightning flashed far off in the hills. They paused, eyes wide, then raced for cover, shrieking with delight. Inside the cottage, they dripped puddles across the floor as Tessa's mother handed them dry towels and warm mugs. The boy sat near the hearth, steam rising from his cup, cheeks flushed from laughing. "Why'd you come back out?" Tessa asked, drying her hair with her sleeve. He looked at her, thoughtful. "Because it looked like you were flying." And in that moment, He almost remembered who he used to be, and didn't mind forgetting. Morning tiptoed into the cottage on threads of golden light and the smell of toasting bread. The prince, though he still didn't know he was a prince, woke to the sound of gentle humming and the soft rustle of someone turning pages nearby. Tessa sat at the table with a jar of honey in one hand and a hunk of fresh bread in the other. Her mother bustled by the hearth, stirring something in a pot that gurgled like a happy belly. The boy stretched and stood, his shirt still crinkled from the day before. "What's that smell?" Tessa handed him a slice of bread slathered in honey. "Breakfast. But only after you help me with the bees." He froze half-bite. "Bees? Don't worry," she said, already slipping on her shoes. "They only sting people who steal." Out behind the cottage was a row of wooden boxes, painted with faded flowers and perched on stumps. The air buzzed with low, lazy wings. Tessa approached with a calm confidence that made the boy feel both braver and clumsier. She lifted the lid of one hive slightly and pointed. "See, that's the queen. All the others follow her. Sort of like a royal family, except she works harder." He peered in, fascinated. The bees moved like one breathing creature, golden and soft, never once pausing to look up at him. "They don't care who I am," he whispered. Tessa glanced over. "Why would they? You're just a boy with jam on your nose." He laughed, wiping his face and watching the bees buzz back into the sky. Back at the table, he spread honey across another slice and chewed slowly. Tasted like wildflowers, sunshine, and something even sweeter. He didn't know yet that this was what memory was made of. Small, sticky mornings with no title attached. Later that day, with their bellies full and fingers still sticky from honey, Tessa announced, "We're going into the village. You'll need your shoes." The boy looked down at his bare, dirt-dusted feet and wiggled his toes. "I think they like it out here." She rolled her eyes and tossed him a pair of boots. Not his royal ones, but scuffed leather ones with a hole in the toe. Even village feet need boots when there's goat poop on the road. They set off down a winding dirt path, past sunflowers taller than houses and trees that rattled in the breeze. The boy expected, he wasn't sure why, but he expected trumpets, or fanfare, or at least someone to notice him. But no one did. The village was alive with normal. A baker called out prices. A boy chased a hoop down the lane. A tailor cursed under his breath as thread tangled in his lap. No one gasped. No one bowed. Tessa tugged the boy's sleeve and pointed to a chalkboard outside the bakery. "Best jam buns in the county," she said proudly. "And if you smile nice, Mr. Cabbage gives you an extra one." "Cabbage?" the boy echoed. "That's just his name. Long story. Don't ask." As they passed the square, a small dog barked at them, then promptly tripped over its own ears. The boy crouched down, laughing, and the dog licked his nose without asking permission. No one noticed him. Not as a prince. Not as anything. Just a boy with muddy boots and a lopsided grin. And for a reason he couldn't explain, it felt safe. Like no one expected anything from him here except that he be kind and keep up. Tessa shoved a warm jam bun into his hands. "See," she said. "Told you. Cabbage always comes through." When they returned to the cottage, the sun was beginning its slow dive toward the hills. Shadows stretched across the garden like sleepy arms. As they approached the fence, a loud buzz startled the boy so much he nearly dropped his jam bun. From behind the woodshed strutted a goat. Not a particularly large goat, nor a particularly elegant one, but one with an unmistakable sense of entitlement. "That," Tessa said with a sigh, "is Pancake." The goat stomped over, nose in the air, eyes narrowed in what could only be described as aristocratic judgment. The boy stepped back. "She doesn't like strangers," Tessa warned. Pancake gave him a sniff, then turned and tried to nibble the edge of his shirt. "Hey!" he yelped, stepping away. "She's eating me." She does that, Tessa said, already giggling. She respects no one. Not even the mayor. Especially not the mayor. Pancake bleated and began trotting off with a swish of her stubby tail, only to return moments later and head but the boy gently in the shin. She's chosen you, Tessa said solemnly. You are now her chew toy. Trying to make peace, the boy tore off a corner of his jam bun and held it out. Pancake sniffed, huffed, and accepted it with queenly grace. See, Tessa said. Bribery works wonders. The boy crouched down beside her and scratched gently behind her ears. She leaned into his touch like a sleepy boulder. You know, he murmured, for a goat named after breakfast, she's sort of majestic. Tessa snorted. She once got her head stuck in a teapot. He laughed, full and loud, with his hands still sticky and the goat now using his leg as a pillow. The prince, who didn't remember palaces or crowns, was slowly learning something better. How to be loved even by a goat. The next morning, Tessa flung open the cottage door with dramatic flair. It's market day, she declared, as if it were a royal proclamation. The boy blinked sleep from his eyes. Is that important? He grinned. Very. It's the only day the breadman, the button lady, and the singing carrot vendor all show up in the same place. He sat up. Wait, singing carrot. Long story. Come on. They hitched a small wooden cart to Pancake, who looked entirely unimpressed, and began their bumpy journey into town. The cart rattled over stones, and the boy clutched a basket filled with eggs so carefully, you'd think they were made of crystal. The market square buzzed with voices, aromas, and the clatter of wheels. Stalls burst with vegetables, trinkets, and so many colors it made his eyes feel full. Tessa darted between booths like a fish in a stream. The boy followed, carefully balancing the egg basket, until a loose stone caught his foot. He stumbled forward, arms flailing, crack, crack, crack. 3 eggs exploded in his hands. An old man burst into laughter nearby. A woman handed him a rag without even asking. No one yelled. No one scolded. Try again next week, the vendor smiled kindly. Eggs like to test new fingers. The boy, red-faced and dripping yolk, nodded gratefully. Tessa returned to find him sticky but smiling. You've been initiated, she said, handing him a paper cone of roasted chestnuts. They sat on the edge of the fountain, watching pigeons strut and listening to the singing carrot man, who, unsurprisingly, was just a very loud singer holding a carrot. The boy licked salt from his fingers and looked around. No guards, no rules, no pressure. Just food, friends, and forgiveness in the air. After the noise and bustle of the market faded into afternoon shadows, Tessa tugged the boy's sleeve. Come on, she said. There's a place I want you to see. They left the village behind, walking a narrow path that curved up through a field of wildflowers. Bees buzzed lazily. The air smelled of sun-warmed grass and distant chimney smoke. At the top of the hill stood a weathered bell tower. Its stone was worn smooth in places, moss creeping like ivy fingers up one side. The wooden door groaned as they pushed it open. Inside it was cool and still. Dust floated like tiny stars in beams of light slipping through cracked windows. A narrow spiral staircase led them up, until they emerged into a round room open to the sky. The view took the boy's breath away. Below them, the village looked like a patchwork quilt, rooftops stitched together with winding lanes and waving trees. Chickens pecked in distant yards. Laundry fluttered like flags of peace. It's quiet here, he whispered. Tessa nodded. I come when I want to think. Or not think. They sat side by side on the stone ledge, legs swinging into empty air. Pancake, who had somehow followed them without being invited, began chewing on a wildflower growing from a crack. The boy closed his eyes and let the wind brush his cheeks. The bell above them creaked gently, not ringing, just resting. "I don't remember anything," he murmured. "But I don't feel lost here." Tessa didn't answer right away. Then softly she said, "Maybe remembering isn't the point." A bird flew past, its wings slicing the quiet like a whisper. And high above the village, where even the castle spires were just a shimmer on the edge of the world, the prince sat still and peaceful. That night, the cottage glowed like a lantern tucked under a hill. Wind tapped gently at the shutters, and the fire popped softly as it settled into embers. The children were curled up beneath a patchwork quilt, stitched with faded stars, moons, and crooked flowers, spread across a wide bed that smelled faintly of lavender. Tessa held a candle in one hand and a worn storybook in the other, her voice dancing over the words with just enough flair to make the shadows on the wall flinch and stretch. The prince lay beside her, chin propped on his hands, completely spellbound. And then, she read, "The dragon sneezed so hard the stars wobbled." He giggled. "That's not possible." "Says who?" she challenged, closing the book with a thump. "Maybe stars like a good sneeze." The candle flickered as a breeze brushed the room, and the silence that followed was a soft one, the kind made for thoughts that float just above sleep. The prince turned onto his back and stared at the low ceiling, where the quilt's shadows made constellations that only children could name. "Sometimes," he whispered, "I feel like I'm remembering a dream I didn't have yet." Tessa yawned. "That's called growing." He smiled. "Do you think I'll remember this one day?" "You are remembering it. Right now." He let that settle into his chest, warm and slow. Pancake the goat snored softly from the corner. Yes, she had her own cushion. Course she did. Outside, the sky stretched like an endless ocean, stars drifting gently. Inside, the candle was snuffed, and the room fell into hush. In a bed stitched with care and shared laughter, a boy with no crown and a girl with muddy toes drifted into sleep, wrapped in a night that needed no gold to feel rich. That night, while the wind whispered through the trees and Pancake softly snored against a squeaky floorboard, the prince dreamed. But not of goats or gardens or jam buns. He dreamed of light, bright and endless, spilling from chandeliers taller than trees. He walked down halls lined with mirrors so polished they seemed like windows into someone else's world. Velvet curtains brushed his fingertips. Footsteps echoed like memory. There were no smells of soil here, only wax and lemon polish. No buzzing bees, no giggles in the rain. Everything was quiet. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. He turned and saw portraits on the walls, men and women in gold frames, wearing frowns carved from centuries. And in one frame, dusty and crooked, he saw himself. But different, crowned, postured, lonely. In the dream, he reached out to touch the boy in the portrait, but his hand passed through. The walls began to hum like violins playing a song too slow. Candles flickered. The air grew cold. Then came the voice. Not loud, not cruel, but heavy like books stacked too high. "You must come back." The prince stepped back. "Why?" "Because you are supposed to," the voice said. "You are made for rooms like these." "But I like the garden," he whispered. The floor trembled gently. Dust fell from the chandeliers. Gardens do not need princes. He looked again at the portrait, at the boy who looked like him but didn't feel like him. The crown shimmered. The boy inside the frame did not smile. Suddenly, the dream folded in on itself. The gold dissolved into fog. The walls became sky. And he woke up, in a warm bed, under a quilt, with a goat snoring near his toes and the scent of tea and wood smoke whispering from the kitchen. His hand pressed to his chest, where his heart beat faster than usual. The morning after the dream felt different, like the light was a little too sharp and the birds a little too loud. The prince moved slower, his hands pausing between spoonfuls of porridge, his eyes staring just a moment too long at the doorway. Tessa didn't notice at first. She was too busy coaxing Pancake out from under the table with leftover crusts. But when the prince stepped outside without a word, she raised an eyebrow and followed. Down the lane, an old man in a heavy coat trudged past, humming and clutching a bundle of letters tied with twine. The village postman. "Morning," Tessa called. He waved, dropping a letter as he fumbled in his bag. It fluttered to the ground at the prince's feet. He bent to pick it up, and froze. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with a golden seal pressed into the wax. The crest was unmistakable, even though he didn't know how he knew. A lion, a crown, and a sword, regal and real. His fingers trembled as he turned it over. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, familiar. Tessa leaned over his shoulder. "That's a royal seal." He said nothing. She studied his face. "Do you know who it's for?" The prince nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the name scrawled across the front. "It's me," he said. He didn't know how he knew, only that it rang inside him like the bell tower on windy days. A name he hadn't spoken since before the fall, a weight that slid silently into place. He tucked the letter into his pocket, the seal unbroken, and turned back toward the cottage. Tessa said nothing, but the silence between them was different now, thin and strange, like a thread pulled too tight between two patches of cloth. And neither of them wanted to tug on it. That afternoon the garden was quiet. Tessa knelt beside the carrots, pulling weeds with practiced flicks of her wrist, humming a tune about a fox who wore boots. The boy, her friend, the stranger, the almost prince, was nearby but not really there. He'd stopped telling jokes. He didn't giggle when the chickens chased each other in confused circles. He planted seeds, but slower now, like his thoughts were somewhere behind the clouds. Tessa pretended not to notice, for a while. But when he pushed the watering can aside and stood up without a word, she did. "Hey," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You okay?" He nodded, but his eyes didn't match. "Just tired." "You've never been tired before." He shrugged. "Maybe I remembered how." She narrowed her eyes. "Is this about the letter?" He looked away, toward the distant hills. The castle, barely a shimmer in the far-off light, rested on the horizon like a sleeping lion. "I think I used to live there," he murmured. Tessa sat back on her heels. "You think?" "I don't remember all of it. Just bits. Staircase that goes nowhere. A bowl I wasn't allowed to use. A door that locked from the outside." She didn't answer right away. She just picked a weed and let the roots dangle. "Do you want to go back?" His lips pressed into a line. "I don't know." The wind brushed through the garden like a whisper. Finally she said, "If you do, that's okay." He glanced at her. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "Not quite." "I like planting things with you," he said quietly. She smiled. "So plant this moment. It'll still be here even if you walk away." And for the first time, the thought of leaving didn't just make him sad. It made him afraid. The village feast was a blur of color, music, and roasted root vegetables so fragrant they could have lured a dragon from its cave. Long tables stretched beneath garlands of twinkling lanterns. Children ran barefoot through the grass, sticky with berry juice. Laughter bobbed above the rooftops like paper balloons. The boy sat beside Tessa, a plate of food in his lap and a crown of woven dandelions in his hair. Someone had called him the Turnip King, and everyone had laughed when he bowed dramatically. But now, with the lanterns glowing and the songs spinning into the stars, he wasn't laughing. He picked at his food, listened without hearing, smiled without meaning it. Tessa noticed. She passed him a roasted apple and nudged his arm. "Eat, or Pancake will." He chuckled, but it faded too quickly. Nearby, someone played a fiddle, fast and wild. A girl in a blue dress grabbed a boy's hand and spun him in circles until they both fell over giggling. The prince watched them with a look that didn't belong to him. It belonged to someone older, someone lonelier. "You're not really here anymore," Tessa said softly. "I'm trying," he replied. "Don't try. Just be. Like you were when you laughed at worms." He looked down at his plate, where the food had gone cold. The stars above flickered gently, but they seemed further away tonight, like they'd pulled back to watch from a distance. He folded his hands and whispered, "What if I belong to somewhere else?" Tessa tilted her head. Belonging isn't about blood or buildings. It's about where your smile happens without trying. He didn't answer, just stared at the sky. And Tessa, chewing slowly on her roasted apple, didn't press. She simply sat beside him in the quiet. 'Cause sometimes, staying is louder than speaking. The morning after the feast was too still. No birds sang. No breeze played with a clothesline. Even Pancake was unusually quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. They heard the hoofbeats before they saw them, slow, deliberate, echoing down the village lane like a heartbeat too heavy. Dust rose in soft clouds as a patrol of horses trotted into view, flanked by men in dark blue and gold, their armor polished to a dull glow beneath the gray sky. At the front rode a man with sharp eyes and a crest on his chest. A lion, a crown, and a sword, the same as the seal on the letter. The boy stood still beside the garden gate, hands at his sides, the old hole-in-the-toe boots dusted with earth. Tessa stepped forward, but he gently held out a hand to stop her. The leader of the guard dismounted, scanning the quiet villagers who had paused their morning routines. His gaze landed on the boy. "Your Highness," he said, not loudly but clearly, "we've come to bring you home." The boy didn't respond. Not right away. He looked around, at the garden rows they'd planted, the crooked scarecrow wearing Tessa's old hat, the goat chewing on the edge of a bucket. And then at Tessa, whose arms were crossed tightly, jaw clenched. "I don't remember being a prince," the boy finally said. "You don't need to," the guard replied. "The kingdom remembers." Hush fell. The boy nodded slowly. "I'll go," he said, voice small. Tessa didn't move, didn't speak. She just looked at him, really looked, as if trying to memorize the way his face looked beneath a sky filled with clouds, not chandeliers. And as he walked toward the guards, the dirt from the garden still clung to his boots. They met one last time at the bell tower. The guards had given him a few minutes. A farewell, they called it, as if that made it easier. Tessa was already there, sitting on the edge of the stone ledge, legs dangling over the side like always. She didn't turn when he approached, just kept her gaze fixed on the village below, its crooked chimneys, the glint of sunlight on puddles, the smoke curling from her mother's chimney. He sat beside her. Not too close, not too far. "I didn't want it to end like this," he said quietly. "It hasn't ended," she replied, voice steady. "You're just walking into a new chapter." He looked down at his hands, clean now, dressed in soft royal gloves he didn't remember owning. They didn't feel like his anymore. "You were the first person who didn't bow," he murmured. She finally turned to him, eyes sharp and bright. "That's because I didn't see a prince. I saw a boy with muddy boots and no clue how to hold a carrot." He smiled. "Real one." They sat in silence. A long, soft silence. Pancake was not there. She'd refused to walk uphill that morning. Somehow that made it even harder. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small bundle. Inside, a stitched square of blue cloth with a crooked star, a tiny pouch of vegetable seeds, and the crown of dandelions, now slightly wilted. "For you," he said. She took them without a word, fingers tightening around the bundle like she was holding something breakable and precious. "You'll forget," she said suddenly. "They'll polish you and puff you up and you'll forget this." "I won't," he whispered. "I promise." They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They just watched the village one last time, where the sky felt close and the stars had names. The castle was colder than he remembered. Its walls gleamed with polish and perfection. Servants bowed. Courtiers whispered. Every hallway echoed like it had forgotten how to hold warmth. They dressed him in velvet boots and a royal blue tunic embroidered with threads of gold. They combed his hair until it lay in neat, obedient waves. They called him Your Highness and spoke in voices lined with honey and rules. He said little. They showed him to his old room. Tall ceilings, a chandelier shaped like a sun, shelves of books he didn't remember reading. The floor was too clean, the bed too large, the silence too sharp. That night, he dined at a long table with more forks than he had fingers. The food was beautiful and strange, tiny portions arranged like flowers. No one passed bread. No one laughed when he dropped his napkin. No one laughed at all. After the meal, he slipped away and wandered the halls, his steps swallowed by thick rugs and tall shadows. He found a garden tucked behind a west-facing wall, trimmed hedges, manicured roses, and fountains that sparkled but didn't splash. He knelt and pressed his palm into the soil. It didn't smell like earth, smelled like perfume. His hands stayed clean. The moon hung heavy above the towers. Somewhere, far beyond the hills, he knew there was a goat stealing laundry and a girl tucking a stitched square beneath her pillow. And as the stars blinked above him, far and cold and too far away, the boy who was once a muddy gardener whispered the name only she had ever called him, Turnip King. And he smiled, not wide but real, just enough for the moon to notice. Days passed in the castle like measured footsteps, neat, quiet, and always the same distance apart. The boy, now called Your Highness again, sat at a grand desk in his chamber, staring at a blank sheet of parchment. Outside, the garden bloomed with roses trimmed too straight, and fountains that never laughed. He dipped his quill into the ink. Then, slowly he began to write. Not the kind of letter filled with royal signatures or wax seals. No announcements, no orders. Just words from a boy who once forgot who he was, and maybe didn't want to remember everything. Dear Tessa, today I touched dirt and remembered how good it felt under my fingernails. I whispered Turnip King into my pillow and laughed. The garden here doesn't smell like your garden. Too neat, too quiet. But I'm making something new. Behind the stables, I found a small patch of wild grass. I planted carrot seeds. With my own hands. You always said real things grow from crooked places. Hope these do too. Best tell Pancake I miss her angry little face. And her teapot adventures. He folded the letter carefully, tucking inside a stitched patch of blue fabric with a tiny golden thread star, a new one he'd sewn by candlelight. Beside it, he added a pouch of wildflower seeds. And on the back of the envelope, in faint pencil, he drew a wobbly goat wearing a crown. The messenger didn't ask questions when he handed it over. No one in the castle ever did. But far away, in a cottage garden full of laughter and clumsy rows, a girl would one day open it, and know that no title, crown, or hall of mirrors could quiet what was planted in her friend's heart. castle garden changed slowly. One corner, once forgotten behind the stables, now hummed with bees and unruly vines. The boy, still called Prince by those around him, visited it every day. He did not wear gloves there. He knelt in the soil, let dirt cling to his fingers, and planted crooked rows of vegetables that did not match the palace's neatness. He named the carrots, whispered to the tomatoes, and once, he caught himself laughing alone when a beet refused to sprout politely. The servants called it strange. He called it peace. On some evenings, after lessons and dinners with too many forks, he would slip away barefoot and dance quietly in the moonlight, just for a minute, just to feel the earth speak back. And on one still night, he looked up at the sky and whispered, "I remember everything." The stars blinked softly in reply. In a drawer in his room, folded carefully, lay a patchwork square stitched with flowers. And on the windowsill, a tiny wooden goat figurine carved with love by someone who didn't care about crowns. He didn't return to the village. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But he wrote, and he remembered, and he planted things that no one else could quite understand. And as the wind curled through the hedges, a single dandelion bloomed in the palace grass, swaying like a yellow crown. And now, little one, the lights grow dim and the stars lean close. The castle settles into silence, its towers sighing gently under the weight of the night. In the quiet garden, the boy who once forgot his name lies on the grass, eyes drifting toward constellations only he and a girl with muddy boots truly know. He no longer needs a crown to feel important. He no longer needs trumpets to feel brave. He simply breathes, grows, and remembers where joy first took root. Sometimes belonging doesn't come from a throne. It comes from laughter in the rain, a goat named Pancake, and seeds shared in secret. Sometimes the greatest kingdoms are the ones we build with our hands. So, if your dreams tonight take you to castles, let them also take you to crooked gardens. If you see velvet halls, remember the threadbare aprons. And if you hear your name whispered on the wind, may it sound like someone who truly knows you. Let your thoughts grow slow and soft now. Let them drift like petals on warm soil. You are not lost. You are just remembering something gentle. And maybe, just maybe, the stars feel a little closer now. Good night, little dreamer. Sleep well.